In the era of migration, the concept of displacement, with those associated with it, such as migration, uprooting, hybrid identities, cultural imagery, is of both interest to the social sciences and humanities in terms of comparative cultural and literary studies, for example. The context of Europe historically is made of wanderings, of displacements with a positive content, when these are voluntarily assumed as an adventure or a search of for a goal, with a negative content when involuntary uprooting exists, focusing on the violence of the crossings imposed by territories represented by the figure of immigrants, refugees, exiles, marginals, excluded wanderers. So, this wandering, whether through exploration trips, colonization, immigration, or in recent years, migrations, uh, we have this context, this European context, has always lived with us, and we have always been living in this context of migration. So, in current times, migrations is most of the times perceived as a postmodernism in a postmodernism context, meaning that we look at it uh, as relating to displacement experiences that are specific intersubjective modalities of the current times, different from the migration more restricted to the entry or exit of individuals from a country or region in search of better living conditions. To move is to place yourself in different places, to move between spaces, which also means to circulate and inhabit new communities, living among different landscapes, reconfiguring yourself in the tension of living with various and different identities. In the transnational world we live in today, according to Elena Gonzalez, the concept of displacement has become defining since we live in an overflowing modernity, as Apudarai characterizes it, in which the means of communication and migratory movements would be the two axes of transformation, creating new landscapes, always fluid, mutating, and in permanent mobility. And these are always constantly being created. Also, for James Clifford, modern culture is defined precisely by displacement, being the result of intersections, mobility processes, in a world where identity is not fixed in a place, but rather related to relocations and being therefore plural and multifaceted. This displacement is a particle of separation and translates precisely the distance from a place. And the withdrawal, even if voluntary, always creates in a feeling of loss and a feeling of expectation of what is to come. The eye is in a movement of time and space that leads him to question the notion of himself, of of the place he's living in, of his place of origin, and sometimes it can manifest by the lack or loss of a stable location and placing the core of identity in a place and a time different from the present. The texts dealing on migration, for example, and uprooting and relocation or return, contain features that allow exploring the various forms of spatial, cultural, and affective displacement and the feeling of tension or conflict of identity and self assertion. Travel literature texts, the so called literature on the formation of personal identity, uh, is excluded from this reflection. We are talking about migration literature. So we have common elements in migration literature as a theme, but usually it focuses essentially on the different, on the dealing or in problems of displacement, of link to objectives, projects, and dreams that are redone, are rethought. And so theme of migration that is recurrent, and the figure of the immigrant that permeates literary production is very important now, and it acquired a special relevance in the second half of the 20th century, especially from the 1980s onwards. This particular situation owes much to the interest of writers of immigration descent who understand the theme as a subject to aesthetic treatment, thus giving space to the history of the memory, the questioning of identity, and the reformulation of the I. So, some of the writers who represent the intercultural world today, the migration world, without falling into ethnic manifestos, approach immigration as a shaper of society. That is, in addition to the transformation of people, there is the transformation of places of passage, destination, and even those of origin and return, which are modified by the result of the various flows. And literature itself and other artistic expressions are modified as well as cultural products. Paul White considers some characteristics that accompany the individual works and the body of works that can be identified in this type of literature of migration. The identity shift, the ambivalence and the use of narrative as a history of people, place, and memory, which it involves the category of time. By identity shift, the author understands the realignment at the level of I according to the context. Not wanting to say that people's personalities are homogeneous, because even those who do not move change according to the context, the fact is that migrants lost one place and have to adapt to another, reviewing their image and that of the others and assuming multiple identities. In addition, there may also be the feeling of living in two worlds, of being divided in space, time, and psyche, and the loss of roots, pain, and malaise that permeate the text that can be, and this can be felt. Literature lives a lot from this inner tension and from the exploration of identity questions, the awareness of otherness and stereotypes. Displacement also occurs in terms of adapting one's own dreams and projects. The subject may have to review them, aware of new influences and conditions. So, literature has the ability to reflect on these complex realities, and it has also a cultural strength to influence mentalities. Basically, to fulfill its ethical function and reminding man that he is part of a diverse humanity. Narratives that proceed through broken lifelines, but that continue in space by joining other lines, changing according to the impulses of alternating forces, therefore with many angles and directions. Lives composed of different parts, sometimes epic, with epic stories or with a tragic content. These migration stories are rarely poetic. The narrative follows autobiographically or biographical paths, preferably, to which is added this tone of the choice of discovering new horizons, or sometimes this tragic character in a destiny of a man that tries to surpass his will and to surpass displacement, um, and coping with his identity shift and trying to remain solid and strong.